Welcome, everyone. I'm Aatish Nayak. I lead our product and engineering teams for search and e-commerce, and really excited to welcome you to this panel today to accelerate AI adoption in e-commerce. I'm joined here by Jason from Yelp, Pranam from Walmart, and Sebastian from Mercado Libre. And really excited to talk with these AI and ML leaders today. I'll kick it off to Jason right now to quickly get started with his introduction.
Sure. So I'm Jason Sleight. I'm a group tech lead for our ML platform and applied machine learning group. So do a lot of ML ops things, building our ML platform for doing ad hoc computing in Jupyter notebooks, Spark ETL feature patches, training and serving models at low latency, high robustness, and then collaborate with all the different areas around Yelp for kind of using the platform effectively and doing ML on all of our different use cases.
I'm Pranam. I come from Walmart. Primarily, I've been focused on, improving product discovery for our consumers. Touched on various different problems, be it personalization, be it recommendation, be it search. I've been leading teams doing each of these in the past, and at this point of time, I lead the search algorithms team.
I'm Sebastian. I work at Mercado Libre as VP of Technology. My role encompasses all of the cross technology in the organization, with a very strong focus on machine learning, AI, from the platform perspective mostly. So how do we build the right tools for all our data teams to get their models into production? It's a fun challenge.
For each of your companies, I'm curious what kinds of problems is an AI and ML helping solve, and then you can specifically focus on a few areas if preferable.
Perfect. That is super broad, and as I'm sure you're aware as you're in the industry, the use cases are pretty limitless. And the common ones, of course, are around search, recommendations, but we also use a lot of AI and ML on sort of like the back-end operations for logistics, for obviously fraud prevention, to determine the optimal routing algorithm for our logistics network, to determine an approximate size or weight of a package just from images or descriptions of it. Those are some of the maybe not so obvious ones that we get a lot of value from.
So it seems like there's like a personalization and then a logistics optimization component and everything in between.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jason, would love to hear how
Yelp. So Yelp is fundamentally like a two-sided marketplace. So we kind of have models on, it's really like the three different parts of it. So there's the consumer space of it, which is helping consumer users find the right businesses for what they want. There's a lot of things in search ranking, making recommendations, a bunch of like content modeling stuff about like which photos are the most beautiful? Does this photo have a picture of a cheeseburger? What's the most popular dishes at these restaurants? All of that kind of like content consumer modeling. Then there's a bunch of business modeling. So trying to do ad targeting, trying to do price prediction, trying to predict and forecast how many like visitors are going to visit this store and do like visit attribution for our ads to help like performance marketing on like really large scale companies. And then there's kind of a third one, just like Yelp strategic models, which are like trying to recommend budgets, trying to do fraud detection, abuse detection, all that kind of stuff. And I think those are kind of the three main areas we think about it as.
Yeah, Pranam, I'm curious how Walmart thinks about it.
So from a Walmart perspective, again, right, I think when I look at the problems we solve, it's really around discovery of products, right? That's one end, right? The other side is primarily around fulfillment, right? Once discovered, how do you fulfill those items? From a discovery standpoint, I think the area of AI ML, I would just say, it's really foundational, right? Be it search, be it recommendations, be it personalization, be it something which cuts across everything ads, right? All under the foundations of catalog and content. I would say AI ML, I think as a solution is really foundational there. On the other side, on the fulfillment side, I would say, somewhat in its infancy, not just at Walmart, but in broadly, right? Overall, it's still early days. We definitely have a number of investments into utilizing AI and ML across our fulfillment network. as well as with the rest of the enterprises.
Yeah, so clearly there's like a pretty broad application of ML. It seems like one of the common points here is personalization and discovery. So in general, I'm curious, like just going deeper here, what are some of the actual technologies inside ML being used across your company? Is it like classic statistics, logistic regression, or is it actually getting to very intense deep learning? And I am curious how that's matured over probably the last 2-3 years in your businesses.
Everyone hears about deep learning and says that's what we want to do, and everyone's like AI, deep learning all the way. But for us, at least in the real world, we like to start very simple, because when your deep learning model learns some crazy thing and you have no idea whether it's right, it like sets you up to have really biased models that don't optimize your business objectives well. So we like to have our models start with a simple heuristics, maybe like somebody designs a decision tree by hand kind of a thing, and see what that does, because it's really easy to like convince the product managers that you should be able to roll this out when they can understand what it's doing. And then as you get more mature in the model, you can move up to, logistic regression or gradient boosted decision trees. And then finally, when for like really critical business problems where improving that log loss by 0.5% really matters, then you can put deep learned neural networks on there when you really understand things. There's obviously some exceptions with like text and image processing where, neural networks are just so much better than everything else that you just kind of have to start there. But for a classical supervised problem, we like to start as low tech as we can. And once the product is more mature and we understand all the nuances, then increase the sophistication where it's necessary.
I think similar in spirit, primarily simple first, right? Overall, you try to go after fairly simple solutions initially, and then build on top of it. I think culturally, overall, the ML teams are still making a general transition around feature engineering to training data. There is this transition where you need to turn from building features and doing more feature engineering to being relentlessly focused on training data. Teams are doing that transition overall as well, right? And this is not just Walmart, but overall, but it's definitely the case with our teams. And again, as you see more training move in the context of training data, we also see areas where training data has evolved. We see more complex models, right? So that's where we see the transition generally.
So you're basically saying that you don't go ahead and just create a transformer model out of the box. You really start simple.
Yeah, I think there will be a point of time when I think even those models will be considered simple in some sense, right? Again, it's very relative. But at this point of time, again, right, there is a saying in the Valley about the value of logistic regression. It's a highly effective, powerful approach. So we continue to stick to that when we can, but we do move into other areas as the training data becomes richer.
Pulling off of the training data becoming richer, one thing we're starting to see is that we had done some like very sophisticated feature engineering for our linear models to kind of get non-linear interactions in. And as we've started to migrate those up to more complex models like gradient boosted trees or neural nets, we have to like redo some of this feature engineering because it was custom tailored, and it's like, well, we don't need that anymore. Let's just give it a different representation and different encoding of things. It's been an interesting transition.
Yeah. And Sebastian, I'm curious, you're seeing this similar trend where you start simple and then get more complex in implementation as you grow.
Absolutely. One of our core values at the engineering team and the entire company is to not only start simple, but try to keep things simple. So as much as possible, we will take a trade-off, even with hopefully a small percentage difference for a system that we can control more of. So even, and I think Jason was saying something like maybe you have a deep learning model that is providing some really amazing results, but you cannot predict it. And there's something that will talk to your users maybe. And we've all seen the crazy things that happen when they release stuff that learn from Twitter and is free to run around the world. So we definitely maybe even take it a step further where we're willing to make a trade-off for simplicity and for really understanding what we have in our hands, rather than squeezing that 0.00001% improvement. There are cases, as Jason was mentioning, where obviously like more complex approaches are going to be like orders of magnitude better than their old school counterparts, or maybe calling them old school is not fair when neural networks were discovered or proposed a really long time ago. But I mean, from going from orders of magnitude there, it's worth it. When it's not orders of magnitude, we really take a look at whether we can keep it simple and not just start simple.
And this is actually a good transition, because one thing you mentioned that is particularly poignant is that it seems like ML in e-commerce and marketplace particularly is a classic example of long tail data problems, because you have so many different products, so many different listings, all these different attributes for those products. You have all different kinds of global users. And so I'm curious, at that like global scale, at that the scale of data you guys have, how do you ensure you're serving both sides of the marketplace effectively, and like what considerations you're taking into account for these global markets?
I think you're gonna like my answer, because for a lot of those sort of like long tail or very edge casey scenarios, we actually have humans in the loop, no? And I think that's an interesting topic to open up, no? For example, for us to have a proper catalog of everything that we sell or we want to sell, or that our merchants want to sell. We obviously employ a lot of automatic algorithms, but there's also a very human component, or when maybe two things are very alike, where our model cannot determine whether this fits here or here. We have a whole system and UI and I mean, that's not going to be news to you, but we have a whole system where humans help our algorithms both train, obviously, for the future, but to make those specific decisions where the model is failing.
Jason, Pranam, any similar observations from your organization?
No, I think fairly similar. No, at the extreme, definitely there are these cases where humans, exceptions and so on, humans do fill in. And that directly feeds into training data again, because these are the difficult examples, right? That definitely is the case. Even more, in the context of, I think, broadly marketplace, the biggest challenge definitely in the context of retail, I would say, with product discovery is cold start. It's a very, very critical theme. One might argue that cold start is less of a critical problem in the context of classic like web search and discovery in other areas. But in retail, I think that's a very, very critical problem. I don't think the industry has done a good job, and that's one area that we need to continue to do better.
No, it's very interesting, because it's an area where the physical stores are doing a great job, right? And they have a bunch of experience of people just walking into a store without knowing specifically what they're looking for, leaving happy. That's not something that's easy to replicate when you have sort of like an infinite shelf and an infinite inventory, and sometimes you don't even have information about your customer. It helps when you do, when it's sort of like a cold start from someone that you know. But obviously, because we're all growing so much, and the only maybe positive side of the pandemic has been that driver on extra growth for e-commerce. That is a very, very hard to solve problem. And all these new users, no data, no information. What's on the first page? No?
I think the thing we're investing a lot in is trying to kind of determine the user's intent when they are doing things, right? Because it's not like they just make a single interaction and do nothing. They execute a bunch of queries, and how do we refine their query to get them down and find what they actually want as fast as we can. And the idea is to kind of make that long tail be shorter, right? And kind of put more emphasis and kind of push people into queries and like user experiences where we've put a lot of effort into make it be really seamless. Obviously, the biggest challenge there is how do you scale it to keep it going, right? You only have a finite engineering workforce, and you have a huge number of possible things you can optimize for.
Absolutely. And well, just to give a little more concreteness to this cold start, maybe Sebastian, could you actually walk us through, like, what do you mean by the cold start problem? Like, what is a scenario that actually does come up in the context of your business?
It's actually fairly simple, and I can start with the toughest, right? So you have a user that heard of our website for the first time, maybe through an ad or a friend recommendation. They come into our store through our app or via the web, and we have to decide what are we going to show, right? What's going to be the product recommendations, and we have some signals around, okay, what time of day is it? Even if there's different profiles, whether you're shopping in the day, at night, weekends, the week. So we have some signals that we try to use. And actually, the way we solve this is we have a determination on what are the products that maybe are not the ideal for you, but the ones that are going to show us give us the most signal, right? From what you either decide to click on or don't click on, and start to build the more personalized experience from there.
Great. No, these problems are it seems like pretty real. I wanted to touch on the thing Sebastian mentioned around how COVID has really accelerated e-commerce. I'm curious, how can you talk a little bit about how COVID either accelerated or decelerated technology adoption in e-commerce, and particularly in AI?
Yeah, I think maybe I can go first. I think from a again, if I view this as discovery and fulfillment, two pieces, from a discovery angle, I would definitely say it's reaffirmed the value of AI and ML, in the context of discovery, as traffic to these websites have increased, online experience have increased. I think it's really reaffirmed why its value. Of course, right, training data has increased, right, as just by the context of increase in traffic. From a fulfillment standpoint, I think, we all go back to the classic, the world running out of paper towels. I think, that's a classic thing that we saw as part of COVID. I think fulfillment side, I would say it has definitely emphasized the adoption of general data across the supply chain network, adoption of that feedback loop, and in some sense ML also as part of that. We are definitely seeing more of the robotics in the supply chain network, right, across the industry. That is happening as well. So I would say in general, I would say it has affirmed the value of ML in the discovery context, and it has really catalyzed the use of ML and just generally data and ML, robotics, and so on in the supply chain or fulfillment side.
Yeah, I imagine there's a pretty big user discovery problem where I think that one of the classic examples here is if you search face mask prior to COVID, you'd get some beauty or makeup mask, but then afterwards you need to rank like actual face masks higher, possibly in your algorithms, right? So are there any instances like that where your algorithms are like, what does this mean? How do we handle this type of user behavior?
I think the big thing that comes up there is just making sure that you're retraining your models frequently and pulling in new data to make sure that you're staying up to date with the latest trends. Like your example of searching for face masks is exactly right, where your query recommendation from face mask before was going to be into like some beauty product, and now it's not. And if you didn't retrain your ML model rapidly or on a regular basis, then you were never going to pick that up. And there's a lot of those little kinds of trends where, like, certainly at Yelp, things like going to restaurants and doing reservations went to near zero last April when the entire country was in a lockdown, and things like delivery and takeout went like 10x what they were before, some ridiculous number, right? So there's a lot of just big shifts, and of course that changes the kind of things that you want to show. And your ML models can tolerate this to some extent, but you really need to be retraining it frequently and have that pipeline set up to make it work efficiently on a regular basis.
Sebastian, did you see some similar trends in terms of really rapid shift in user behavior?
Yeah, and luckily in Spanish the term is different for the beauty product and the covering for preventing transmission and whatnot. So that specific case we did not see. And I would say the shift was so sudden and so quick that if you were not doing things properly before the traffic started flowing in, I think it would be hard for, I mean, there are teams that can move very quickly, but if you're already a big organization where it takes time to get things changing, it could really hurt you, and luckily for us, Mercado Libre had been working, for example, on our logistics network for quite a few years, and we're prepared to deal with the surge without having to modify in crazy ways the operations or the technology or the stack. So I'm pretty proud of what we accomplished. And to Jason's point, I think if you're not already retraining your model quickly enough, by the time the traffic started flowing in, it was too late to make a change. Then, unfortunately, the pandemic lasted so long that I'm sure everyone got their act together. But it was definitely, for us at least, a competitive advantage to have been ready for such a shift, thanks to our execution from previous years.
I think an interesting challenge that COVID has brought about now, with things starting to return more to like their former baselines, is how we deal with that period of like super anomalous data. And I know for a bunch of our like experiment reads, we just like explicitly ignored this and like, this data is garbage, it means nothing, throw it away, it doesn't matter. But we're having a lot of problems when we're trying to look at our historical data and say, oh, well, when was it acceptable, and like how weird is it to use data from 9 months ago to kind of train our ML models now and get these kind of longer term trends when it was such an extreme event.
Yeah, the other thing in the same light, I would like to add is, Aatish, you did bring up this thing around expanding to different geographies, countries, languages, and so on. See, there are certain countries like the US, which is highly multilingual, right? There are multiple languages being spoken in the country. So as part of COVID, you would also see folks, if you think of retail from an omni way, folks are walking into the store, speaking a different language. Now, using the online experience more. So you see some of these things, you'll see more Spanish queries potentially, in the same interface and so on. Again, the simple short term, the way is primarily for the models to be more sensitive, for your features to be language independent where it can. There are a bunch of things that happen, as well as your signals to be more sensitive to more recent data. But we see a lot. We saw a bunch of this as well overall as part of the macro effect. Yeah.
How does that affect like the actual technology, like in terms of these global and multilingual markets? Like, do you start with multilingual BERT for query understanding? Like, how does that go to the very granular building block level?
Yeah, maybe I'll briefly touch on it, and then it really depends, right? For certain areas and certain systems, we do that. For certain areas and a few other systems, we don't. It really depends, and we take it case by case. That would be my take.
I think it also depends on how different the languages are. We are also lucky that our main markets are Portuguese speaking and Spanish speaking. So not the same language, obviously, but there are enough similarities where we can reuse a lot of our apps, and others are built specifically for the different languages.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit to what Sebastian, you had mentioned earlier on kind of building things the right way, is one of the common trends and problems we see is that as we hit this like critical mass of utilizing AI in production inside a large organization, how do you actually ensure all the data management and annotation, model deployment, productionization is standardized and taking advantages of that economies of scale? And so a typical path we see is like companies moving from a decentralized MLDS teams to really centralizing the common building blocks for this like cohesive MLOps platform. I mean, I'm curious, how do your own experiences kind of match or differ from that?
It describes very clearly what we're going through. We have a very robust internal platform called Fury, which basically acts as a platform as a service, but even more so, just like the day-to-day interaction from 90% of our development team happens within our own platform, our own tools, which is then connected to a bunch of services and AWS and GCP and we do rely a lot on the cloud. So we have that model for deploying code, just for web serving code or for batch processing. Then when we started with machine learning, it was all very distributed, and everyone had their own notebooks and different ways of getting those models into production. So we decided to extend that platform and created Fury Data Apps, which is basically our ML ops end-to-end pipeline. It goes from getting the data very easily for both notebooks and the final production and training delivery systems. Then moving through the entire pipeline of our data teams and helping them along the way in every step, even on the monitoring of the models, right? So we go from design, the notebook, put it into production, and then how are you monitoring? And obviously not just the web metrics or CPU utilization, memory, whatnot, but the actual performance of the model and how to report that back to the teams is a fun challenge that we're going through right now.
I think that's going to be a fairly universal story at this point. If you're doing AI, ML kinds of things, you have to have an ML platform at your company now, and there's really no reason that you shouldn't. If you're at a large company with lots and lots of ML developers, then maybe you'll build something in-house. Otherwise, there's lots of solutions you can just go buy on AWS or GCP, and or if you're like at Yelp, we're using MLflow and MLeap and Spark-based things, and the open source technologies or the paid products are really good now. ML ops is a vital part of doing AI at an industry level, and you have to.
Yeah, the same here too, right? It's gone through those phases of the life cycle in terms of how ML development just generally works end to end. Starting with model training to monitoring. It's very similar. For Walmart scale, we do have something internal as well to make it work.
Yeah, and as leaders, kind of working on these platforms, how do you, at a high level, measure success or like productivity improvements from kind of centralizing or building really robust ML ops systems?
I think at the very beginning, like when you go from not having an ML platform to having one, it's super easy. Like without an ML platform, it takes months to build a model. And when you have an ML platform, it's like, oh, I added a new feature to my model and it took me a day. And like it's black and white. Clearly you're saving lots and lots of developer time that's measured in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars easily, kind of thing, right? Once you get beyond that, I think you start measuring things in terms of how frequent are you pushing code, like how frequently are you pushing new models, how frequently do you have to roll them back, what's the business KPIs that you're improving on those things, are you targeting the right users to build the right models, and are you using your AI experts efficiently to solve the right problems, things like that.
No, I think similar in spirit, right? Primarily as with classic engineering and how it's evolved, right? Just generally code updates, right? Start with monitoring the systems and then figuring out how to accelerate the code updates, right? Release management, release processes, and so on. Similar, right? ML is still fairly early from that perspective. Similar, you have monitoring, you have a way to update the models, but with ML, the main difference is it has a very, very strong experimentation loop, right? Which is primarily before the updates, how does experimentation work? So experimentation becomes a first order citizen in this primary loop with ML, I would say. And primarily the way we evaluate how well our ML ops and ML way of working works is primarily around how well are we experimenting, how many experiments are we running, are they successful, how well are we learning from these experiments. That's a fairly big KPI and metric in terms of the way we evaluate how well is our ML way of operating.
When you say running experiments, are you talking about running A/B experiments on traffic or offline evaluation kinds of experiment stuff?
Yeah, so there are two forms of experiments. Online experiments which would be at the A/B test. There are different forms of online experiments. There would also be offline experiments, right? We call it the inner loops of experiments. Both happening.
Cool. That's one thing that I'm actively thinking about is how much do we need to do online A/B experiments for things, especially for problems that are really well established, and we know that the offline log loss is strongly correlated with the business KPI that we want to move. Like, do we need to A/B test that, or can we just know that, oh, it did log loss good enough, we can just deploy it like a code deploy kind of thing?
Yeah, as long as I think a strong transfer function can be established, and as that function can be well aligned across, everyone gets the transfer function, I think they're good.
Yeah.
I'm going back to one of the earlier comments around kind of human in loop and high quality data. Could you, just for the audience, could you kind of explain for your respective businesses why high quality data catalogs are so important, particularly in these marketplace businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because my first reaction is that it seems so obvious, right? Like, it's what we offer our users, and obviously the Walmart case is very similar to ours, but I can imagine for Jason as well, right? Like the catalog of restaurants, and basically it's where everything starts and ends. So if you don't have good quality there, it's like an actual restaurant with bad food.
Yeah, I mean, it's to make sure you're optimizing for the right thing, right? So there's a bunch of like little trivial things that you have to think about, like, oh, well, there's the Google bot comes and runs a bunch of searches for us, and you have to make sure that you filter those out, because we don't care about optimizing search for Google bots, right? We care about optimizing search for actual consumers. And if you don't have good data, then you just overlook all of these little things and you end up optimizing for the wrong thing. You deploy your model and it's like, hey, why are we losing $1 million? Oh, because we weren't optimizing the right thing. Time to roll back our model and fix the data quality bias issues.
Yeah, and I think just super critical, right? Quality of catalog, super critical. But really, I think broadly, I think the catalog quality needs to improve overall. But it's really, I think, right now tuned to this whole textual modality, right? In terms of how customers interact with products. Maybe somewhat to the folks walking to a physical store modality, but less. So I would say it's a very wide open space on how does catalog, description of products, description of items change, as both for the existing modality, which is very prominent, but also for future modalities. I think that's a very critical area.
Yeah, so when you mention modalities, like obviously there's a lot of text content, there's product reviews, customer reviews, there's descriptions, titles, and so on. Like, are you talking about also how to combine images, like images of products, images of content with that textual modality and insights you get?
That's right. Right. The way customers shop, going forward will continue to change and evolve significantly. So it's about primarily those other ways of describing the product. Right?
Yeah.
It's really right now. It's really textual with a set of structured fields. That's how it's set up right now with some images. I think it needs it'll evolve significantly going forward.
Yeah, and we see this too. We're really multimodal AI graduating from the research labs and the OpenAIs of the world and actually starting to use in production with Clip and whatnot. So that is interesting to hear. Close out really just to get your opinions here. So where over the next 5 years, let's say, where are you most excited to see AI's potential impact outside, of course, e-commerce and marketplaces?
So speaking holistically, I'll say, like, I think healthcare and transportation are probably the areas I would pick, where there's a huge runway and obviously huge potential to impact and improve human lives by making AI healthcare and AI transportation things.
Yeah, I would even tell you that for us, even not being as altruistic, like transportation is a huge one, because we have to transport. Like we usually think of the self-driving cars for ride-hailing, which is actually part of my background. But we most of the transportation is actually of things, and there are a ton of improvements, both in quality of life for drivers, but also in the economics of how shipping stuff around the world works, will be revolutionary for sure.
Yeah, I think short term, medium term, again, just to echo Sebastian, mostly on the fulfillment side. Maybe towards the late medium term, I think discovery has significant areas where discovery of products can be improved. But I think broadly long term, I think it's really healthcare is a wide open area, right? When used the right way, I think it really will do magic to humanity. So I think that's
Especially in like increasing accessibility to underrepresented areas that don't have access to healthcare experts. Being able to deploy AI as a triage for things is game changing.
right. Yeah, totally agree.
What is the hardest challenge you're working on right now?
An interesting one for us, definitely discovery is one. The other one is actually a very classical problem, but when you start getting into the granularity that we need is forecasting, demand forecasting, supply forecasting. How do you make them match up? How do you go from one fulfillment center to another? What should you swap around? Typical traveling salesman problem combined with what are people going to buy? And
It's building up like shareable features for all of our models. So we have hundreds, if not thousands, of ML models running productions for all kinds of little things, and there's probably a lot of benefit for sharing huge classes of features amongst the different models that have kind of been built up independently over the last decade, kind of cross-pollinating those ideas more globally to benefit everything. Ends up being very challenging to get all of the data connected in the right way so that it's accessible in all the different real-time services and things like this.
Yeah, I think definitely, the again, similar feedback loop, at the extreme, known problem is the cold start, but generally more broadly, there's fairness. There are other areas that also come in, right? Those are, I think, open areas. We need to significantly increase our focus in those areas, and we will.
Thanks so much for joining us here today to hear from Sebastian, Jason, and Pranam. I'm Aatish Nayak, and this is Scale Converge. Have a great rest of the day.